Hello, comrades. I just read The Alchemist, the H.P. Lovecraft version, the short story, not the Paulo Coelho novel about the law of attraction. And after reading The Alchemist, I just have one question. Why castles? Why are castles scary? So the story takes place in a castle, of course, a French castle that is slowly falling apart, and it's home to a cursed family of nobles. And hundreds of years ago, there was an alchemist, skilled in the dark arts, who had a son, Le Sorcier. One of our narrator's ancestors killed the alchemist, and his son, Le Sorcier, cursed the entire bloodline of our narrator to die before the age of 32. The family's fortune falls and their castle slowly collapses with the centuries. Knowing that he will die within a week, the last in his line, and after the death of the final servant in his family, our nameless narrator explores the crumbling castle and finds a trapdoor in one of the abandoned towers. And he goes through. He finds an old man who speaks to him in some form of medieval Latin and tells him about the curse, how he will die soon, and how Le Sorcier had killed his ancestors with a bow and a poison. Our narrator strikes the old man, fatally wounding him when he reveals that he is Le Sorcier, and through the power of alchemy, he had discovered immortality, and in order to fulfill the curse, he had snuck into the castle and killed each member of the bloodline by completely natural means right before their 32nd birthday, for 600 years. And so I thought that was kind of cool. It creates kind of an interesting contrast with the curse, which we had thought was magic, is more of a revenge promise, but Le Sorcier is capable of fulfilling that promise because of his alchemy, because of his dark magic, and the elixir of life. But all this did, of course, bring me to my opening question. Why castles? Why are castles creepy? Why, whenever there's a vampire story or something creepy in Europe, it involves some kind of castle? And maybe it's just because they're old. There aren't a lot of old buildings in the United States to really make a comparison. But Europe is littered with stone fortresses that were previously functionally impenetrable. And they're kind of relics of our past, and they're often associated with aristocracy. And I think a lot of our monsters are kind of associated with aristocracy as well. You know, we have bloodsuckers like vampires. No comparison, obviously, between them and the aristocracy. We also see something similar with pyramids and movies about, like, mummies and their curses, but that to me always felt more like kind of an exoticization of Europe. It kind of feels like a different category, because it's not really our history. I don't think, like, Egyptians make a lot of horror stories about pyramids. I might be wrong about that. I don't know a lot about Egyptian horror stories. And so I've just been wondering, thinking about castles, why are castles scary? These weird old buildings. And I am left to wonder what buildings that are now completely normal will kind of live on to be horror fuel for our future descendants. I think there's already kind of a certain genre of horror related to abandoned mental institutions, or abandoned asylums, as we often, call them, which seems more tied specifically to kind of the very clear and horrible history of how we treated people with mental illness and intellectual disabilities, and we basically tortured them. But I wonder, maybe there'll be other kind of buildings that will be canonized in future centuries as horror buildings. So I think, there might be some good candidates like coal mines or nuclear power plants. Maybe there'll be any kind of mine, really. I feel like it's kind of amazing there aren't more horror stories about mines that, you go in, you dig this really deep tunnel all the way down to extract some gold or coal or whatever valuable thing. That feels like it's just ripe for, stories about monsters or the mountain getting angry and evil spirits and all of that. Or just nuclear power plants. I think, imagine 300 years from now, oh, that's the nuclear power plant that was abandoned 150 years ago. Nobody's in there. That would probably be really creepy. Let me know if there's any other building you think might be creepy in the future. And so I do have some new words from today's story. First up, there's matriculation, which is an opening in a castle wall, which is meant to drop stuff in order to harm people who are laying siege to the castle. There's a wainscot, which is kind of the wood paneling on the lower half of a wall. I've probably seen this a million times. I just didn't know there was a word for it. There's tenantry, which I like. It's the group of tenants is kind of like the peasantry. Peasants, peasantry, tenants, peasantry. It's a nice noun. There's menial, which I'd always known as an adjective, menial labor, but apparently it's a rather old-fashioned and I imagine disrespectful way to refer to people who do that labor. So you can talk about the menials. H.P. Lovecraft was not known for his good politics. And finally, we have fiel, which is just an alternative version of vile that seemed to have died out. So it's interesting to think, if things had just been a little bit different, we'd have the word fiel instead of vile. So I've been reading some, horror stories this October. I'm going to read more of the H.P. Lovecraft, and we're going to talk about some other things, maybe Frankenstein, cool things like that. So if that sounds good to you, subscribe. And if you want to talk about the last story I read, it would be The Beast in the Cave, and you can click over here. But remember, good night, good day, good potato.